Okay, great. It's 7:02, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. And anyone who comes in late, they can just kind of catch up and then go back and review it later if they want to. Again, my name is John O'Donnell with EVELO Electric Bicycles. I want to thank everyone for spending their Thursday evening with us and checking out the webinar. Just for a couple housekeeping details, all of you folks are on mute. Main reason being that there's a lot of feedback otherwise if we don't do that. If you do want to ask questions at any time, you can go ahead and check in the chat box, type any questions that you want. You don't have to wait until a specific time. Just type the questions as they come up, and then various points during the webinar, I'm going to go ahead and address them. So feel free to type any questions that you have. First, I want to talk a little bit about the overall purpose of the webinar, what it is and what it's not, and just kind of define the purpose a little more. It's a general overview of selecting an electric bike. We don't want to delve too deeply into the specific technical specs on our bikes or on any other manufacturer's bikes. We're certainly happy to do that, and if folks have specific questions about our bikes or about other models, please reach out to us either via email or phone. We'll be glad to help. But there are so many different bikes out there that we don't want to get bogged down too much tonight talking about the specific details of specific bikes. And also, we want to use this for informational purposes. We don't want to try and tell you we have the only bike to buy. We just want to give you kind of a basic overview of what's out there. And some steps in the stop process that'll help you select the correct bike, whether it's our bike or whether it's something else. So if anyone's having trouble hearing me, please let me know in the chat bar over there. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And what we'll do is we'll just start with the slides and work our way down from there. So first question, why electric bikes? Seems like it's a pretty simple question. You're here, obviously, so you're interested in electric bikes. That said, the electric bike's not for everyone, and occasionally we get queries from folks who, after speaking with them, we try and direct them to something else, actually not an electric bike. Electric bike is really for folks who want to ride but want the assist. There are limitations to the speed you can go, to the distances you can go. And for some folks, if you're looking for really high speeds, really far distances, sometimes a scooter is actually a better option. But electric bikes, generally speaking, they're for folks, sounds simple, but important to understand that it's for folks that do want to ride, but they want to ride with some assist. And so next question, obviously, is, what are the reasons that drive folks to look for an electric bike? And understanding those a little bit better can also kind of help you determine not only the model, but some the specifics within the ranges as far as what sort of bike you want. So main reasons, there are probably four main reasons that folks decide they want an electric bike. Terrain challenges is probably the biggest. I'm based in Seattle out in the Northwest, and I've dealt with a lot of customers locally, and it's a very, very hilly place to ride. It gets limited by terrain. A lot of folks have to put the bike on their car, go drive somewhere so they can ride, whereas with an electric bike, you can just get out, get over pretty much any hill, and not kill yourself, basically. And that's a pretty common theme where folks want to ride, but they're limited by some of the terrain, some of the local hills. And so having the assist when you need it is one of the drivers that people start looking at when they're looking at e-bikes. Next thing would be if folks are looking to go a little bit farther in terms of range. If you were to do a 20-mile ride on your own, under your own power, if you're able to do that, generally speaking, with even a standard battery pack on most bikes, you can pretty much double the range for the same effort, would be a kind of a good rule of thumb. So whatever the distance that you're riding, with most e-bikes, you can pretty much double that range uh, with the same amount of pedaling. Obviously, if you're just getting back into riding and you're limited to really short distances, say 5-7 miles, you can easily go as long as you can stand sitting on the saddle. So that up to the range of the battery. So say 25 to 40 miles roughly for most bikes. And then another thing we run into often is equalizing power. And what I mean by that is if you have a couple that ride together, it's not uncommon to have one person who is an active rider, one person who's kind of a reluctant rider. And it's really not gender specific. We have a lot of women who ride a lot whose husbands don't ride as much. They want to get them out on the bike and vice versa. And it's a great equalizer. I'm pretty fit. I ride a bike a lot, and I've ridden with friends who are not super athletic, don't ride a bike a lot, and with 250 watts of power, they have no problems riding at the same speed over the same terrain. So it's nice to be able to allow folks to ride together. So that's one of the other things that really does drive people to electric bikes. And then the last consideration I would put into what I would say general utility purposes. And this can be a real plus. I spoke to one gentleman a couple weeks ago, he's a customer of ours. He's had his bike for about a year and a half, and he has a 30-mile commute in the Metro DC area. And basically, it's given him about an extra hour of his life back. His commute each way is about half an hour faster than it was prior to doing it with a standard bike versus doing it with an electric bike. And when you start to add that up over a space of a week, a month, a year, it's a lot of free time. So it ends up being well worth it. So we do have a fair number of customers that use it for utility purposes like that, whether it's running errands, commuting, folks that want to go for a ride after work but don't want to arrive at work sweaty. So for those sort of utility purposes, electric bike can be pretty useful as well. So that kind of covers the basics as far as the whys. So we're going to go next to types of electric bikes. We're going to scroll down a bit. So where to start? There are a lot of options out there, obviously. And they're through a variety of price points. I've seen electric bikes as low as $500 up to probably $15,000. Most of them are obviously in a much narrower range, I would say. Probably in the $2,000 to $2,500 to $3,000, $3,500. That's kind of the sweet spot where you'll find most bikes. So we're going to go top 3 mistakes, and this is kind of an interesting question because we get I talk to a lot of customers every day, there's a lot of information out there, and it's a lot to digest. The average consumer is not an expert on electric bikes, so it's a lot of information overload. So what we want to do is kind of focus on just kind of the general parameters that'll help narrow the decision around for you a little bit. And in thinking about the 3 top mistakes that I've run into from people that are buying bikes again, say people that bought a bike 3 years ago, then they're buying something else. These are the things I would caution you against. First would be focusing just on the upfront cost. Electric bikes, by and large, are they're mechanical beasts. There's a lot involved with them, and the battery is a pretty significant portion of the cost. If you buy a bike with a battery that's not easily replaceable, or a battery, something else that we run into a lot, a battery that just can't be replaced. If it's a company that's selling it, a closeout bike that doesn't have support, and then you're left with $1,000 paperweight, because someone buys the bike and then they just can't get the battery replaced. So keep in mind that you want to have something that you can get serviced down the road in the future, and it's an investment that you can continue to use down 2, 3, 5, 7 years down the road. Next thing, both our bikes and other manufacturers, there are typically variations within the line. You'll find bikes that, for instance, we offer a 250 watt version, a 500 watt version. For a lot of folks, the lower power version actually works great. That's what I ride. I'm used to pedaling a lot. It works great for me. Some folks want the more power. If you're kind of between the two and you're not sure, and this, I think, again, for our bikes or another manufacturer, if you're between the two, go for the bigger one. Spend the money up front, because in general, it's almost impossible to increase the power of the bike down the road, mostly because more powerful systems work with different voltage. So that if you buy a bike that works on say a 36 volt system that's 250 watts, and you want to upgrade it, there's not going to be any real easy way to do that. So I would buy what you want the first time, so you end up having to rebuy it. And then the last thing, I have to kind of chuckle because it's something I do with almost everything I buy. But I would say avoid analysis paralysis, because there's so much information out there. Eventually, you just kind of have to go with it and make a decision, give it a try, and see if it works for you. Because I've talked to customers that I've been talking to for 3 years now, and they missed out on a lot of riding over that 3 years. They're still thinking about it, and I know myself, I've done this with other things. So at a certain point, sometimes it's best just to take the plunge, whatever it is, and give it a go. So we have a few questions that I'm going to address. They're on the left-hand side here. So Ted asked about how many miles can you go up a 12% grade. 12% is pretty steep. Depends on the configuration, depends on both the power output. On the 250 watt, the lower powered bike, 12% grade. Trying to do the math in my head here. I would say realistically, you could make it up an 8 to 10 mile climb with the standard battery pack, a little bit longer. Keep in mind that you can go up, and then the next question David asked about a 20% grade. As I mentioned, I'm located in Seattle, and I've ridden it. There's about a 22-23% hill that's from downtown that goes up to my house. And 20% is not, that's not a real common hill. It's obviously anything that degree is going to be very, very steep. You can get up, even with the lower powered bike, you can make it up a 20% hill, but you'll be going very slow. With moderate pedaling, I'd say 3 miles an hour, 4 miles an hour, kind of the point at which you're, struggling to balance and not tip over. There's actually a video online of one of our customers in San Francisco riding up Lombard, and he's going about 3 miles an hour, and he's on the older 250 watt bike. With a 500 watt bike, you'll be going a more reasonable speed, probably 6 to 7 miles an hour with moderate pedaling. And for short hills like that, it's no problem. It actually works great for that sort of stuff. For longer hills, obviously, the more power you have on hand, the less percentage of it you'll be using, so you'll be able to go a little bit longer distance. So, and then Mike actually asked about the cost of the replacement batteries. And this will be not only for our bikes, but I think it will be kind of universal for most bikes. It's a big range. $500 would be the least expensive one for the 250 watt, 10 amp hour, the standard range. Can go all the way up to $1,200, which is the 500 watt extended range battery. So big range, but between 500 and 1,200. And I think you'll find that's going to be pretty much the case for most bikes that use a lithium-ion type battery. So I'm going to go back to the slides here. Since we covered the top 3 mistakes folks make, Next thing I want to go to is defining need, which is basically kind of determining, what it is that you need in a bike. And in order to do that, I think main things you want to take a look at. First off, the terrain that you're riding on. If you're riding on somewhere that's particularly hilly, then you're going to want to look for something that has a bit more power, a little bit wider gearing range. And as I mentioned, I think a lot of folks, generally speaking, they are looking for e-bikes for hilly terrain. If you're in flat terrain, say if you're in Florida, some parts of Arizona, Michigan, places like that, you still have terrain challenges if you're riding in windy weather, stuff like that. But generally speaking, places that are a bit flatter, you can get by with a little bit less power. Next thing you want to take kind of an honest look at yourself is what sort of distances you plan on riding. If it's shorter, most bikes have various battery configurations, and batteries are expensive. So if you want the extended range, in general it costs more. Like for instance, on our bikes, we have a standard battery that is rated for 25 to 40 miles. Reason that's such a big range is that if you're doing a fair bit of pedaling on moderate terrain, you'll be at the longer end on the upper bound, say 40 miles. If you're doing light pedaling, if you're using throttle only a lot, not pedaling at all, then you'll be in the shorter bound, say 25 miles. If you see yourself doing 5 to 15 mile rides, standard battery is going to be fine. But if you do plan on doing longer rides, or if you're not sure, but you used to ride a lot, you think you like the idea of doing, say, a 30 to 50 mile ride, that's the sort of time then that you might want to consider going with the extended battery. Third consideration, I would say, is the amount of cargo that you're carrying. Some folks are just riding themselves, and it also includes the weight of the rider. Heavier rider is going to be more inclined to need more power, obviously. And then we have folks that use the bikes for hauling stuff. We actually have a customer with a 500-watt bike I've seen towing 2 child trailers in tandem, and I'm not sure I'd recommend that because it looked a little sketchy when he sent the photo off, but he was doing it, and there was, I'd say probably he was hauling about 400 pounds behind the bike. It was a lot. He had multiple kids in each trailer, so if you think you're going to be doing crazy stuff like that, you're going to want the more power. Other considerations, these are things you may not think about, but important thing to note, most electric bikes are pretty heavy. So if you live somewhere where you're going to have to be transporting the bike up several flights of steps, you're going to want to take that into consideration. We have folks that do it, but the average weight for our bikes, for instance, it's going to be about 60, 65 pounds. And that's pretty standard. Some electric bikes, ours are actually, I'd say, probably 3 to 5 pounds lighter than a lot of the similar bikes that are out there, but they're heavy. There are some lighter options available. Generally speaking, the lighter options will have less power and less range because the battery itself weighs a fair bit. So, if you have a situation like that where you have to transport the bike up multiple steps, then you definitely want to take that into consideration. Storage is another thing. There are some folding options that are out there. We don't offer one because there are some limitations to it. But if you're really tight on space, sometimes a folding bike actually is a bit better way to go. So just something to consider as well. We have a couple more questions here, so I'm going to go ahead and start to go through those from the top down. So. And I'm going to get a little more water here, so bear with me just a second. Okay, so Mike asked how easy the bikes are to pedal with no assist. And kind of a tricky question. There's not any resistance per se. On our bikes, the motor is decoupled. The motor is decoupled from the drivetrain. So there's no additional resistance from the motor when you're pedaling. With a hub motor bike, there may or may not be. A lot of times you're actually turning the worm drive mechanism in the hub, so those bikes do add some resistance. That said, it's important to note that it's a heavy bike. So on flat terrain, you won't notice it a whole lot. When you're going uphill, you'll definitely notice that it's a heavy bike and it'll be more of a shorter ride. But there's no extra resistance per se, so you can't just get on it and ride it as a normal bike. Our bikes actually have a mode of pedal assist 0, so you can power up the bike and the display panel will be functioning, so you can have all the information, but there's no assist at all. And in that mode, you can also use the throttle. So that if you're pedaling, if you don't want to use any assist, but then you find yourself on a hill and you really need to get something, you can always lift the throttle and get some power that way. So. Okay, so Roger asked about the life expectancy of the battery, and he asked about how long to last. I assume you mean the overall lifespan of the battery versus how long it will go on a specific ride. If that being the case, our batteries are rated to 750 full charge cycles, that's higher than most. Although similarly priced bicycles will have batteries that are rated roughly the same. And what that means, 750 full charge cycles, if you deplete the battery halfway and charge it back up, then that would count as half of a charge cycle. Also, what that means is after 750 charge cycles, doesn't mean the battery is dead. What it does mean is that at that point, it's no longer at 70% of the original capacity. And this is one advantage to going to the longer range battery. And we do have some customers who've done this, and I've spoken with some customers that have had their bikes for 3.5 years now, and they're still getting reasonable range out of the extended battery because 50% of a battery that's rated up to 60 miles, they can still get up to 30 miles. So it's more on charge cycles than it is over time. It does degrade over time as well, but that's actually pretty minimal. It mostly comes down to usage. Best practice for any electric bike battery, first couple times, run it all the way down, charge it up fully. After that, they really don't have memory like a NiCad or a lithium-ion battery. So you can just charge it after each use if that's convenient for you. That's actually what I would call best practice. Only other thing to note as far as battery longevity, if you live somewhere that gets extremely hot or extremely cold, I'd recommend bringing the battery inside. They're easy to remove from our bikes, so you can bring it inside, especially if it gets really hot. That actually does more damage than extreme cold. So if you live in Arizona and you have an unheated or uncooled garage, you definitely don't want to leave it in there in the summer for extended periods of time. Also, if you're a snowbird and you're leaving the bike for a long period of time, I would recommend trying to give it a full charge, say every 6 to 8 weeks. And we actually have some folks, if they're gone for, if they're gone for months at a time, there's actually a charger that we recommend, a timer that you can hook up to the charger that you can set to charge the battery up on a certain schedule, and that can help the longevity of the battery as well. So back to the slides. Getting past marketing, that's also kind of a tricky one because in essence we're marketing right now. There's a certain respect, but there's a lot of information out there, and we try and provide as much informational material as we can. But the one thing we would say is just, we try and put a lot of customer feedback and customer stories on our site. Basically words from folks who've actually, own the product and use it, because there are a lot of ways to kind of fudge the numbers, make the power seem higher than it is, make the range seem higher than it is. So you have to be careful when you're comparing different things just to make sure that you don't get too lost into the details of some of the numbers that get thrown around. Main reason we bring that up is we just see some pretty unbelievable claims in terms of range and miles that frankly just don't, the math doesn't add up and they're just not realistic. So, we try and be upfront as far as the speeds of the bikes, as far as the distances that you'll get, so that you know what you're getting. And again, if you have any specific questions about, how fast does this bike go with reasonable pedaling, how far can I go, feel free to contact us, because a lot of times those questions are situational, and we'll try and get more information from you so we can actually answer it intelligently rather than just blurt out an answer that sounds good but doesn't actually do you a whole lot of good. And then last slide is something we want to talk a bit about, online versus a local bike shop. And just to back up a bit here, I should mention that my own experience, I come from working in independent bike shops, as do a couple of my colleagues as well. So we're certainly not anti-bike shop by any means. We like bike shops, and we use shops on occasion to perform repairs out in the field. If we run into an issue, what we'll do is we'll coordinate with a local shop to take care of any warranty issues that need to be done. But it can be tough finding a shop to buy a bike for a couple of reasons, and that's actually one of the reasons why we've focused our efforts on selling direct to consumers. There are basically two places you can look: independent bike dealers that handle normal bikes, and then electric bike specialty shops. As far as the former, there's a lot of pushback from regular shops who just frankly don't want to deal with electric bikes. And there are a lot of various reasons as to why they're haven't really bought into it yet. But at the end of the day, there just aren't a lot of independent bike dealers out there that really want to deal with electric bikes. And then in terms of electric only shops, the market is still not quite mature. There are some areas where you can find a couple good electric shops. Other areas, even some pretty large demographic areas, where there aren't a lot of great shops out there. And so we've decided, well, at some point we may go back to the dealer model, selling more bikes through dealers. We sell our bikes direct, allows us a little bit of flexibility on pricing. We're able to offer, for what we offer, a little bit better deal because we don't have to go through the middleman, so to speak. We're able to sell direct. We also have worked pretty hard in terms of handling the service end of things, because obviously, if you do run into an issue, you need to be taken care of. So we have a pretty good network of shops that we deal with, and we also have a good in-house service, so we're able to diagnose stuff over the phone. If you do run into an issue, generally speaking, a phone call can resolve it. But if we do need to find a shop, we'll certainly look around and then find a viable resource so you can get the bike fixed. I'm going to check in the questions here. Okay, so Benny asked about regenerative charging. This is a great question. It's something we get a fair bit. Here would be the quick answer, is that the juice isn't worth the squeeze. It can be done, and there are some manufacturers that do it. The problem is the amount of kinetic energy on a bicycle versus, say, a car is so much less that there's just not enough energy to capture to make it worthwhile. As I said, it can be done, but the issue is the amount of equipment that's required to capture that energy ends up outweighing the cost, so that it ends up being kind of a net negative. And I honestly don't see that changing, just because the overall system's not going to have that much kinetic energy. There's just not enough mass. As I said, it works great in a car, but 10, 15 years down the road, as advancements are made, I think the advancements you'll see will be in battery technology, not in regenerative technology as it relates to electric bikes. So James asked, in the event of a battery failure, is it easier to pedal a hub drive or a crank drive? It, Also a good question. There's not going to be a significant difference, but generally speaking, a bike that decouples the motor completely, such as ours, is going to be a little bit easier to pedal because there's really no resistance. The motor is completely decoupled, whereas you will be turning on most hub drives. You'll still be turning the worm drive inside the rear hub. I don't want to overstate that though. It's not, you're not, I'd say it's going to require about 50 watts of power. And an average, average rider pedaling around is going to probably put out about 150. So you can still pedal a hub drive bike, but there will be a little more resistance. Okay, so David asked about life expectancy based on charge or time. It's a function of both, but again, as I said before, overwhelmingly it's going to be based on use versus time. If you were to keep the battery charged in a state of charge, it would probably be 7 to 10 years before you'd see anything along the lines of say 10% degradation in the battery. So time is the smallest factor by several orders of magnitude, really. And James asked about memory on lithium-ion batteries. There's no memory, and really the main reason that we do suggest doing a full charge, it actually has to do with the way the battery management software is integrated with the cells. And without boring anyone to death, we generally recommend it when you first get the bike to run it all the way down and charge it fully. And that's basically just so that the battery management software recognizes that the bike is completely run down. But it's not something you need to do on a regular basis. The only thing that you don't want to do is to put it into deep sleep by letting it completely drain, because that can affect the long-term lifespan of the battery. Mike asked if we, this seems to be a topical question we've had. Mike asked if we had any batteries that have ever caught fire. And the quick answer is yes, we have had one, and it was when someone put a pressure washer directly on the bike. Kind of a long, strange story, but as long as you're not doing that, you'll be fine. And it wasn't a major fire, but in general, you can ride the bikes in the rain. I'm in Seattle, and I'm riding in the rain probably more than I'd like, about 7 months a year. I know it's I guess the Razor scooters and the kickboards that have caught fire, lithium batteries. Catching fire has been a big thing in the news. I think the main reason is that with those devices, the battery and the motors are right next to each other, so they generate crazy amounts of heat. With ours, the battery is nowhere near the motor, and the thermal capacity of the battery is the main thing that will cause something like that, unless you're putting a direct stream of water on it and causing an arc. So as long as you're not doing that, all should be good. Okay, we have a few more questions here, and I'll take them as they go down here. So Roger asked about saddlebags. Because our battery pack is kind of unique, we actually have a specific pack that works with it, and I can send out a link to you. But it's actually made. Might be able to actually type it in here as well. Bear with me just a second. So I put a link on the bottom there, but we actually stock this bag as well, or you can buy it direct from the manufacturer. But it integrates well with the rack on all of our bikes. It has some side bags, side panniers that extend down, but they don't hit the wheel, which is nice and has good capacity, and overall is a pretty well-made bag. We do have some other accessories for our bikes that are available on our website as well. So Tom asked if we anticipate any new features for 2016. That's also a good question. We get asked that a lot, and we don't do model years per se, which is a bit different than what most companies in the bike industry do. When we have improvements that come up, though, we basically do them as rolling additions to the line. The last edition, we had a couple. We upgraded the display panel to a more sophisticated LCD display versus our older LED display. We had some mixed inventory for a while, but for now, all the older ones are gone. We've also added the 500-watt version, made a couple of small incremental changes, but for 2016, nothing really. We're always looking at doing new stuff, but the line I would say for the next 9 to 12 months, as you see, it should be very similar to what it is right now. So David asked about the base price on the 250-watt bike. We have a couple of different models. One that has a Nexus 3-speed hub, which is the Luna, which is more of a cruiser type bike, and it starts at it's right around $2,100. And then all the other models come with an internal hub called the New Vinci system. It's basically a wide range internal hub, which it's very, very slick setup. It offers gearing of a mountain bike, has a very big gear, very small gear. Adds about $450 to the cost. So those bikes will start right around $2,500. And so you got a couple more questions. I'm going to scroll down here. So David asked about electric front wheel only. We actually do. We have an add-on kit as well, which is the Omni wheel, which is exactly that. It's basically it's an all-in-one. The controller, battery are located in the wheel. You can check it out on our site under the pull-down under the Omni wheel. If you have a bike that you really like, it's a good solution for certain situations. It's not as sophisticated as a complete bike. Because it's a front disc type wheel, there are some applications where it won't work great. If you're going on, say, high-speed descents, it can be, from a handling standpoint, can be a bit much. If you're riding on mostly flat to rolling terrain, and if you're using a hybrid bike with a flat bar versus, say, a road bike with a drop bar, it's a great add-on. I've had a chance to ride one in the spring. And like I said, on flat to rolling terrain, it's nice. Using throttle only mode, I was able to get about 16 miles an hour just out of the wheel, and then with light pedaling, I was able to maintain 18 to 20. Range is a little bit shorter, and again, it's a less expensive option. But if you have a bike that you like a lot, it's also a little bit lighter. That's the one nice thing about it. So we've sold a few to folks who live in apartments and have to haul their bike up several steps. And the complete bike, while it does offer a better riding experience, it just wasn't a real suitable option for someone who has to carry the bike up, 12 steps to haul a 65-pound bike. So for that, it can definitely work, and it's definitely a good option. We had an out to a reviewer who has some information posted on it. I don't have the link handy, but if you contact us through email, we'll be able to send that out to you so you can get a look at the wheel. So Brian asked about the life expectancy of the chain. This is an interesting question because we had a reviewer who mentioned that he thought that was a downside to a mid-drive design, that it put extra stress on the chain. And I can tell you he was very misinformed. I'll just kind of leave it at that. But uh, the real chains are very robust. So they'll handle much higher power than you'll ever see on a bike. Um, Generally speaking, when chains wear, it's more from either excessive dirt by never cleaning it or excessive side loads. And one of the nice things about using a bike with an internal hub without a derailleur is that chain alignment never moves. It's always in a straight plane. Uh, so, unless you're riding the bike, I mean, I'm riding in what is, I would say, probably about the worst conditions for a chain, which is uh, 6 to 7 months of constant rain, and you get that road grit that kind of acts like grinding paste that gets stuck in the chain. And right now on my electric bike, I'm still at about 3,500 miles on the same chain, and it's in very good condition. Whereas on my derailleured bike, not non-electric, I'm lucky to get, I'd say, about 2,000 out of a chain. So it's really a non-issue for a mid-drive design. I don't think for a hub drive design, I don't think that's a problem either. Actually, I think in general there are other things that lead to chain wear, but the type of motor is not one of those things. So. But also to Brian's question, if you were to if you have a broken chain, which would be unlikely, you're not going to be you'll be walking the bike. There's unfortunately no way around that. So. James asked about the belt drive, which New Vinci, the company that we use for our internal hub, they do offer a belt drive. And right now our frame isn't compatible with it. It's something we've looked at, and maybe down the road it would require a frame redesign, which is why it's not a viable option short term. Downsides to it, adds a bit to the cost. It's a little bit less efficient. The efficiency isn't a big deal, though, to be honest. I mean, you'll be losing about 2%, but when you add in the power from a motor, it's pretty inconsequential. So the thing that's holding us back from doing it on our current bikes is we'd have to redesign the frames. But I like it. I like chains as well. I mean, they're a very robust setup. The belts are a little bit quieter. That's the one nice thing about them. It does offer a bit of a smoother riding experience. And the only real downside is the cost and the fact that the bike has to be designed around it. And it would use a Gates belt. So Benny asked about using the Aries on mountain biking versus road biking. And one thing I'll mention, I do almost all of my e-biking that I do, since I ride a regular bike on the road mostly. Most of the riding I do is off-road with the e-bike. And I use an Aurora, but the Aries would be similar. I would say that groomed single track and rough fire roads, it's very suitable for that sort of stuff. For technical single track, there would be some challenges with it, and as there would be with, I think, most electric bikes. The motor sits relatively low up in the front, so that for instance, if you're riding over an 18-inch log, the motor is positioned right there. So that's not necessarily going to be the best application for it. But if the single track is groomed, or if you're on like really rough fire roads, definitely suited for that. Only thing I would recommend is that the tires that come stock on the bike, they're definitely the sort of tire that's designed to be used and it's kind of a best of both worlds or worst of both worlds tire. It's relatively smooth, so it works well on pavement. It has some raised side knobs, so if you're on a hard pack, works okay. If you're buying the bike mostly to ride it on dirt trails, I would get a tire that's a little bit wider, a little more aggressive design, and that's really the only real consideration you need to make. So, and then Roger asked about going through puddles. As I mentioned, I'm in Seattle, so it's sadly used to be, I'd say, 5 months of rain. Now it's about 7 months. There's constant standing water. Going through puddles, stuff like that is no problem. The only thing I wouldn't recommend is a full stream crossing where you're submerging the motor. Realistically, it wouldn't be the end of the world if it happened, because the motor is hot dipped and completely sealed. That said, going through puddles and standing water is not a problem. Some of the bikes, the Orion and the Luna, have full fenders. There are partial fenders on the Aries and the Aurora. And if you do find yourself, if you live in a wet climate, you can also, there are some tricks to add a fuller fender to get a little bit more coverage. So I'm going to go back to the slides here for just a second. We're just about done here. We are offering a coupon, and one of the reasons we wanted to do this, besides offering the discount, we are currently having a sale. We've extended the President's Day sale, but if you do decide to purchase, you can use the coupon Perfect Bike, all capital letters. It'll give you $200 off, and in addition to that, you'll also get a complimentary set of the Banjo Brothers panniers, which I had sent the link to when you use that coupon code. So you can type that in, and then that'll also give us a way to track the response from the webinar. And then I'm just going to finish up with a couple questions here. Okay, and then David asked about disc brakes that are wet. Disc brakes, that's probably the one thing they do better than anything is wet weather. V-brakes actually work quite well, except when there's always that tape delay when you grab the brake lever and the rim is wet. Disc brakes, it takes a lot for the actual pad and rotor to get wet because they're centrally located. And since they rotate much more quickly through the pads because it's smaller diameter, if it does get wet, you scrub off the water much more quickly. So they work great in the rain. We use this Shimano roller brake on one model, which is the Luna, and it's only the Luna that uses the Nexus hub. It's actually a really nice system for what it is, which is more of a city bike. Only downside to it, if you're on a very long, steep descent, they can be prone to heating up. But for the application that you'd be using it on the Luna, it actually works quite well. But in a rainy climate, disc brakes are definitely a way to go. We use the Avid BB7s, which is a pretty common cable actuated brake. It's a little less maintenance than a hydraulic brake. Pads are readily available, and it's been in production a long time, so it's a solid brake. So. Question coming in from Benny. Actually, looked like Benny was typing question. Okay, there it goes. Great question. Not yet. Benny asked about integrating fitness sensors that are ANT+ into the display panel, and right now it's a closed system. The display panel that comes on the bike is not ANT+ compatible. We've had a couple people asked about it. It's a cool thing to do. It adds some expense, and it is something we might look at doing down the road. Generally speaking, if we do an upgrade like that, we do our best to make sure that it's compatible with older models. Sometimes that's not always possible, but in the instance of, say, a display panel upgrade, if we were to swap to a panel that was different, chances are we would do it in a way that you could upgrade an older bike to the new display panel. But there are some cool displays out there that are AMP Plus that have GPS and you can download. Right now, they're not compatible with the existing display that's on our bike. So, so that should about wrap things up. Obviously, there's a lot of information out there on our bikes and other bikes as well. So if you have any questions at all, we're staffed 7 days a week and do our best to get back to folks as quickly as possible. You can always give us a call at 877-991-7272, or just give us a shout at contact@evelo.com, and we'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. And again, whether it's about our bikes or any other bikes, feel free to ask, and we'll do our best to help. So I want to thank everyone for attending, and look forward to hearing from you soon. Take care.